We start the phase 2 down by teaching the correction through escape conditioning. You're going to put your dog in the down using phase 1 technique. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. If your dog gets up, you're going to repeat the command down and then use a freehand finger lock or thumb lock to apply steady downward pressure beneath your dog's chin. Remember to praise your dog once they're back in position. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. If your dog is not responding to the correction after a few seconds, you may have to use a treat simultaneously with the pressure to help your dog figure out how to get rid of the correction. The quicker that you're able to apply the correction, the easier it will be for your dog to understand to move back into position. Ideally, we want to correct our dog before they're in the standing position with their elbows locked. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. One way you can be in position to deliver a quick correction is to be kneeling or crouching down next to your dog. You can have your hand already in the locked position, but remember not to apply tension on the leash unless your dog moves out of position. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Another way that you can be in position to quickly correct your dog is to step on the leash next to their elbow so that they have just enough slack that they can lay down comfortably. You want to make sure there's no tension in the leash until your dog starts to get up. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl, Free. Once your dog is shown understanding of the correction, you can stand next to your dog while they're in position, and if they break, you're going to slide in, lock the leash, apply pressure downward while repeating the command. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Good girl. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Down. Down. Good girl. 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 Free. Gypsy, down. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Down. Good girl. Good girl. So you can start to add in some motion by walking around your dog. Good girl. And when they're doing well with that, you can start with your resistance. Remember to start right at the clip. Good girl. Good girl, Free. Gypsy. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Girl. Free. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Remember to praise your dog when they're doing a good job. Good girl. Down. Down. Our next step is to add in the no as your conditioned punisher. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. No. Down. Down. Good girl. Good girl. No. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Free. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. No. Down. Good girl. 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 Good girl, Gypsy. Free. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. No. Down. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good, Gypsy. That's a good girl. Good girl. Good girl. No. Down. Good girl. No. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Free. You want to make sure your dog is staying in position until you say free. So if they're breaking when you put your hand in your treat bag or after you pet them, make sure you follow through with the appropriate chain reaction of commands. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl, Gyps. Good girl. You're a good girl. You're a good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Now let's move on to avoidance conditioning. Gypsy. Free. Good girl. Gypsy, down. No. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Free. Gypsy, down. No. Down. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Free. Girl, Gypsy, down. Good girl. Free. Gypsy, down. No. Good girl. Free. Good girl. Gypsy, down. No. Down. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. As you go through avoidance conditioning, you should start to see your dog respond when you first ask or on the no. Gypsy, down. No. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Girl. Gypsy, down. No. Good girl. Free. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Free. Good girl. Once your dog has completed phase 2 sits and downs, it's time to move on to phase 2 push-ups. So you're going to have your dog do a sit and then a down, or a down then a sit, and just use a variable reward system. Gypsy, down. No. Good girl. Gypsy, sit. No. Sit. Good girl. Free. Free. Gypsy, down. No. Good girl. Gypsy, sit. No. Good girl. Gypsy, down. No. Down. Good girl. Free. Go, Gypsy. Sit. No. Good girl. Good girl. Gypsy, down. No. Good girl. Good girl. Free. Good girl. Good girl. Remember to stick to a half second between steps in the command structure and to follow through with leash correction if you have to repeat the command. The more predictable you are to your dog, the less corrections they'll receive in the long run.